You are watching Over the Back Fence, a conversation with neighbors. This is a production of Neighborhood Falmouth. And our conversationalists today include Jackie Pratt, Mary Pat McKenzie, Mariam Bihari, and I'm Susan Laux. Today, our discussion is going to be about ancestry. Could be 23andMe and or Ancestry.com, could be those kinds of research that you've done. It could be the big book that's been passed down to you by a favorite aunt or uncle or grandparent or something. So what do you know about your ancestry? How interesting is that for you? And any surprises? So who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay, Jackie.
I have an interesting background in that I was the child of my mother's first marriage. She was only married for less than a year at the end of World War II, and at that time divorce was maybe not such a good thing. So she kept it a secret, and I didn't discover that my stepfather wasn't my biological father until I was probably 3 or 4 years old, because I remember when it happened. And I remember I went behind my grandmother's couch and wouldn't come out for a while, because it was it was like, my world kind of dissolved. It was like, what do you mean? And ironically, I never met my biological father. And he passed away before I had sort of thought through. The thing is, my mother was dead set against it. My stepfather was just annoyed because he felt like he'd raised me. So at any rate, by the time that I was independent enough to start thinking about the fact that I'd like to meet this man, he had passed away. So there was no way to take advantage of that. And I didn't really think about my ancestry very much. I knew that and when I got a little bit older, I actually took a trip to Ireland, because both my grandmother and my biological father and his father had immigrated. My biological father from Ireland. And I thought that because he'd gone to Belfast, Maine, and supposedly come from Belfast, Ireland, I thought if I went to Ireland, what I discovered is the boats leave from Belfast. And so there was really no way to trace him down. But my grandmother had always told us she was German, but she came from an area called Alsace-Lorraine that happened to be German at the time that they left. That it went back and forth between Germany and France. And at any rate, when my daughter was about to get married, she wanted to, and they were thinking about having children. She wanted more information. She especially wanted health information, and I can't say that I blame her. And she's a nurse, so it was a priority for her. So she did Ancestry.com, and she did a lot of calls too. She called ancestors who were, relatives who were still around, and checked stuff out, and discovered that I was not 100% Irish on my father's side, that his mother was actually Finnish. Apparently a lot of Finnish people had left Finland because the Russians were there during the war. And yeah. So she had immigrated with him. The Irishman and the Finnish lady ran a resort hotel in Belfast, Maine called Dreamland, and that was their story. And so I learned that I have Finnish, Irish, and on my grandmother's side, we discovered that she wasn't German or from Alsace-Lorraine. That's where that's where she traveled from. She was Hungarian. They were from Hungary.
Oh.
and I don't know the story of why they had to leave. And I'm assuming that she came here as a very young child, 2 or 3 years old. There were some pictures, but in turns out during the time that she was a child, that was the Dust Bowl. They went to the Dakotas, and that was the time of the Dust Bowl, and they once again people were worried about being able to feed their children. And she lived on her parents had a farm, so she was sent to the convent, and as were her sisters, and they grew up with the sisters, and which was from her point of view terrific, because they all got educations. She had two sisters who were nurses, and she and her other sister became telephone operators. And so from the Dakotas, she ended up in Massachusetts as a telephone operator, and that's where she met my grandfather, who was his last name was Gray, and he just was a plain old, wasp. and, the thing is that we learned an awful lot of things that simply were big surprises, and it was actually a lot of fun. And she learned that there weren't a whole lot of hereditary diseases that in the family, and so she was pretty happy about that. But it was amazing, because for a while there, she'd call me up, and once a week we'd have a big surprise, something that we didn't know about. So that's
fascinating.
Yeah, it was, because all of this stuff got edited out.
Right, right. Well,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem, it's not important at the time, or you're 3 or 4, and so why would they tell you that?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to go?
I'll
Okay,
go.
you go, Marion.
I don't know a lot about my ancestry. My mother and father came here in 1939 and 1940 from my mother, Germany, and my father from Danzig, Poland, which is now considered Gdansk. They were able to get out of Germany and Poland almost at the last minute before Hitler came in and started bringing more and more people to concentration camps. So my father especially would not talk much about what had happened, but his father was in the Warsaw Ghetto, and my mother's parents lived in a town called Grabenstein, and they were there probably till 1941 and then fled. And then we don't know where they went. But what we did know is my father's father, died at the Warsaw Ghetto, and my mother's parents died at a concentration camp 6 months before the war was over. And they had fled their town. And my sister went to Germany, and she has the name of the town where they fled to. We have tried to get a lot of information. My sister, as I said, went there, and she found the house where my mother was born and sent me a picture of it. And across the street was a cemetery that had not been opened up for probably 40, 50 years, and it still had a padlock on it. And so they went to the town and got the key, and they were able to see some of the headstones. But anyway, so as a child growing up with parents that had not been there, but of survivors, it was very difficult. They would not talk about it. And my sister, and they're both dead now, but my sister and I still talk how much we lost when they died, because we don't know anything. Mm-hmm. And my sister had a lawyer in Germany to try and see if she could get some facts. And one of the very nice things that happened with Germany, and I can show you a picture, is that if they knew that the person had been killed in a concentration camp and they knew where the person lived, they put a headstone. Can you see that?
Yeah.
They put a headstone either on the building or in the street, saying that someone had lived there who was killed in the concentration camp. So we get bits and pieces here and there, but I don't know very much, and it's very sad. As I said, I wished especially my father could have talked about what had happened, and he was still there during Kristallnacht, and I think you know what that is, when they went in all the Jewish businesses, they took and they shattered all the businesses' windows, and it's called Kristallnacht, and that was in 1939, I think. So he was still there, and then he fled. So I don't know too much, but it's difficult to think about it. So
Yeah.
Marion, have you gone to the Statue of Liberty Island or where because the
we've
archive,
been there, yeah.
yeah, are very good.
My sister, as I said, had been there. She's been in touch with a lawyer, and we just got a couple of months ago, some information of names of ancestors that we didn't know, from the 1800s. We had no idea. And so she's trying to get more information. It comes in drips and drabs.
Have you
But
ever thought of doing an ancestry.com or a 23?
I did a 23andMe, and they found nothing. The only thing that they could tell me is that I'm 98% Ashkenazi Jew. And the other 2%, I don't know what it is. And that's European Jews. So that's, it's sad.
Well, but one of the things, I mean, some of these ancestry things sort of have a potentially creepy backside to them in terms of, how much information is being collected about people and whatever.
Right.
But, the more people who do it, you might find that your grandparents had siblings or your great grandparents had siblings,
Right.
and therefore you would find extended family, second and third and fourth cousins and things like that, that might be able to start putting pictures.
Well, I do have a second cousin who actually lives in Las Vegas, and she's been doing a lot of things, and that's where some of this information comes from. But I really don't have a lot more than this. It's all sort of piecemeal. So when it does come, it's very interesting. But again, it would have been, and I am very sad that I never got to meet any of my grandparents.
Yeah. And your grandmother, your father's mother.
My father's mother died when he was 16. And so she, but he was very close to his father. And my father and his sister came here. And my mother, and they didn't go through Ellis Island, went directly to Chicago. My mother had two brothers. One went to Argentina and one went to Israel. And the one who went to Argentina got married, never told his wife about his past, and had no idea that he was biologically Jewish.
Huh.
And my sister went to Argentina on a vacation and found out where they lived. And she went to the door, and apparently my uncle had died not too long before she came. They had no idea that they had relatives in the United States, nor did they know that their relatives were Jewish.
Wow.
Interesting.
Really interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Grant, we're talking ancestry, what you know about your ancestry, any kind of research you might have
Like
done.
I landed in a good one.
What's that?
Sounds like I landed in a good one.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Being late, just dropping in and
Well,
my apologies.
oh, no problem. So, well, why don't I jump in and I will say that um, a couple of people in my family have been genealogists and have done
Oh,
sort of the standard thing. I mean, not professionally or anything, but so we know. I've been reading a book about Scottish clans, and it's fun to think. You know, we definitely have a Scottish stripe to us, and so learning a little bit about some of these clans and whatnot. My grandmother on the other side of the family always said that we were related to Florence Nightingale. I think that's probably most of us pretty much agreed that she probably made that up. So, so who really knows on that score? One thing that I will say, and this isn't my story to tell, but my sister, but it is very interesting. My sister, my younger sister, is adopted, and the adoption in 1965, when the year she was born, days after she was born, or days before actually she was born, she was adopted. It was a very closed adoption, and that nobody was supposed to know anything, and the records were sealed, and the records wherever the records were stored burned down. Whoever knows. So my sister, had asked my mom about what she knew, and my mom didn't know anything, and said if we knew anything, we'd tell you. And so anyways, my sister did both Ancestry and 23andMe, and had gotten sort of random hits that were far enough out, but she just around the end of 2020, she got two hits that were first cousins, and which is pretty close. And so um, she she pursued it, and she has since found her biological mother, and she's spoken on the phone with her, and she
wow.
has FaceTimed with her, um, and she just said, I feel at great peace. I feel like a piece that was missing has been understood and are found. And she's also said, thank goodness I grew up in the family I grew up in, which, in our teenage years, we have stories of this family's dysfunctional. I hate this family, which everybody said, whether you were adopted or not. I mean, that was just sort of part of the script. But she said, yeah, she's really glad she landed where she landed. And anyways, it's fascinating. And, knowing who's alive and what their stories were and who's not alive. And I will say that when she found this one first cousin, that girl, whose mother ends up being the sister of my sister's mother, got that? So they would be cousins. So anyways, this girl's mother was going to give her up for adoption, and back, at about the same time, and maybe 1966, and was talked out of it by, I think, the biological father. That's not quite clear to me, but was talked out of it. And so she was raised with her mother and biological father. And apparently the mother spent an enormous amount of time telling her, you ruined my life. I always should have given you up. This was the worst mistake I made, was keeping you,
Oh,
on and so forth. So this girl is estranged from her mother, and that mother is estranged from her biological family. And so you think, yeah,
wow.
it is a reminder that, I don't know, it's easy to say plant where you bloom where you're planted, or, make the best of it. But just because, staying with your biological parent isn't a guarantee that life
Correct.
is better. So anyways, it's been fascinating. And yeah, it's very interesting. And of course, because of this whole social media piece of this, it's not going through legal channels, and it's not going through, do you agree to meet, or any of that kind of stuff.
Right.
It's just happens, and it's out there, and you can make contact, and somebody can contact you back or not, as you wish. So
Susan, I have a question. Did your sister find out why she was given up for adoption?
she did. Her mother was 23 and unmarried. The father was, a similar age, I guess, and father was part of a church that the mother's family was really resistant to, and did not want them to be together. And so they wanted them apart. They wanted the baby out of the picture, and they wanted their daughter to have a different shot at life. And so,
Wow.
yeah. And she got, like Jackie was talking about with her daughter Max, she got some of the medical information that you need to know. What's your history, to the extent that mom knew about what her biological father's medical history was. But anyway,
Right.
all
I,
right.
you jarred a memory loose, Susan, when you were talking. I had forgotten entirely that and this might be helpful for everybody. She had gotten she'd found one of my cousins, and who had suggested to her that she get in contact with the Mormons. Apparently they have wonderful,
Oh yeah, you're right.
wonderful archives. And that was where
Right.
she got some of her information and could kind of go searching from there.
Where is that?
The Mormons, the
Mormon.
Mormon Church
Oh, yeah.
in Salt Lake City have amazing archives.
They
Yeah.
also have, because I have looked up some of my family stuff on their things, because where we lived in New Jersey, one of their sites was near us. So they have localized offices like libraries. They're small that you can go to. And the one in Hunterdon County, New Jersey, I know of. I don't know whether there's probably one on the Cape. It's interesting because it's very efficient. They have a lot of information.
So Mary Pat, why don't you jump in?
Well, I have more relatives than I really know what to do with. Not kidding. I have 32 first cousins, and I know a lot of my second cousins, like intimately and up close, and they come here to visit. And my father's family, they came at the time of the Highland clearances. They went to Nova Scotia, so that's Bonnie Pinch Charlie. They were there for a while. And my mother's family, I actually have a lot of the papers here, which is baptismal certificates, wedding licenses, all of that. And it's kind of like an open book. I have traced it, and I have decided that this year, because of COVID and being stuck at home, that's why I kind of have this out. I'm going to do a binder for each of my children,
Nice.
one to my brothers, to each family, which has the original copies of things in it, as well as the genealogy. Because I did do the family chart in the 90s, and one of my cousin's spouses did it, and she traced about 150 years back of the Irish side.
Wow.
And I've been calling. One of my great grandfathers graduated from Harvard Medical School in 1871. I called Harvard and I said, "What year?" And they said 1870. Gave them the name. They got back to me with all the information. So it's really you know, my kids are probably going to go, oh my God, Mom, we have too many relatives. But, but on the other hand, they're really
Yes.
lucky. Donald's father traced his family and Donald's mother's family, and between them, they went back 400 years. In fact, part of Donald's family was in Germany and but came to Canada 300 years ago in Lunenburg, the South Shore of Nova Scotia. So unfortunately for us, everything is like an open book. It is, it, and they still get together, which it's also,
Amazing.
I mean, my grandfather had this, my mother's father, he had a big summer place in Cape Breton, and you know, all of my first cousins, I mean, there would be like 13 kids there in the summer for 3 months because we were all there.
You
And
must have had so much fun.
yeah, some of them were good and some of them were not. However, we, you know, it's been trickier sometimes putting together the health history because they don't really want to say much about it.
Mm.
So, I mean, on my father's side, we know because they all died young. My father died at 33. One of his brothers died at 44. The other brother died at 50. And his two sisters died in their early 60s. So, and it's all cardiac related kind of thing. So we know a lot about a lot of them. Now, one of the things I am really impressed by is this is a copy of my grandfather's pilot's license. He was the 22nd guy in Canada to get a private pilot's license. And this is him in World War I next to his plane.
Wow.
He and he's the one that insisted on having all of his grandchildren with him in the summer. So really, we know a lot, and to the point where my son, my oldest son, did 23andMe or one of those, and he called up when he got the results, and he's like, "This is gross. There's absolutely no variety. I thought maybe we could have been Jewish, or we could have been African, or we could have been something. And they're all Irish and Scottish, except for a few Germans." So, my kids don't care, I guess.
That's funny. Oh my
It is,
gosh.
you know, and we have a lot of family. And they don't kind of go away. They keep connected. It's
I would
interesting.
love, you know what, Mary Pat, I would love to have a family like that.
I would share some with you, but they wouldn't be the ones you want.
Right. But from someone who has none,
Yes, it's a big difference.
it's wonderful to have a family.
Yeah. And I'm not ungrateful because, you know, when we have like, you know, family reunion type things, which are usually related to either funerals or maybe a wedding. And
Right.
so we're all together in Nova Scotia. We all know each other. My mother and father knew each other all their lives. They didn't live in the same town, but my two grandmothers went to college together, and they were.
Wow.
So it's like
You're in a small town that stayed connected.
no, they weren't in the same town. They weren't even in the same part of Nova Scotia,
Huh.
but they stayed in touch. So it's interesting. It's a little upsetting
Yes.
sometimes.
Well, so I want to hear from you, Grant. Have you done any research in your ancestry, or do you know anything about your ancestry?
Tried Ancestry.com and I didn't get too far. I got back to like the 1800s, but all people from Massachusetts. So I had to, for today, I just going on memory of what my father told me. He said, we are members of the Clan Grant in Scotland. Like, here I am, another Scottish ancestry person, like everybody else here. And there is a town called Grant Town, It's on the River Spey, Spey, in the Highlands. And he said, yeah, we were from there, that little hollow there, and we got invaded by all the Grahams and you name it. So there weren't many of us left, but Grant Town is where we came from. So that's all I got to say.
Grant, you are related to my children. Because, I mean, you probably, yeah, I mean, I go by Mary Pat McKenzie. That's my name. My husband is a Grant, and that's where they're from in Scotland. And my
Wow.
all Grants, which, I mean, I'm the aberration.
Well, and I was reading about, as I told you, I was reading about the clans, and I was reading about the Grant clan, and I was actually thinking of your husband, Donald, Mary Pat, but
Mhm.
Grant, I never thought that, your
Yeah,
first name was the last name. And yeah, and you're right. I
Middle
mean,
name, yeah.
these clans fought a lot, and they, the Battle of Glencoe, I learned about in this battle and that battle and this song. And yeah, they're a pretty rowdy group.
Yes, they were.
Fighting the English.
Well, we've had a lot to say, so I think we should wrap this up. And thank you all for joining us today for Over the Back Fence, a conversation with friends and neighbors. This has been a production of Neighborhood Falmouth, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.